I'm going to do a little introduction as to what DTech is and how we work, what we've done with Browzwear, and then turn it over to my panelists as they start to share with you some of the mental transformation that takes place as you move from being technically proficient to really working with more elevated and challenging creative challenges. So with that, let me introduce the DTech Lab, which is, there we go, which is the design and technology component of the FIT Center for Innovation. And the lab serves as a bridge between industry and academia. We work on industry-sponsored projects that really look at the impact of emerging technology on the entire fashion value chain. We put together teams of faculty and students as they solve industry problems with design and technology. And one of the key developments that has really changed the fashion industry has been the advent of 3D fashion design. And we've partnered with Browzwear from the early days, 5, 6 years ago, where we first met Lenny and Lena, and the relationship really, I immediately understood the importance and power of 3D, having come from being one of the founders of a big computer animation company and having made my first picture with a computer in 1969. So I've been involved in 3D for a very long time. And when I saw what Browzwear could do and how it changed the way in which you approach fashion, I was immediately motivated to really integrate it into the culture of the college. So we've done a whole bunch of interesting projects that really look at it, look at its application. And one of the kind of exciting projects we did was to develop a complete new uniform collection for the Girl Scouts of the US. And we developed a whole series of prototypes for them, and we happened to be doing it right at the exact same time that they were doing a brand relaunch. First brand relaunch they've done in a long time. Now that would have been a disaster under normal circumstances, but because of the interactive nature of 3D, we were able to accommodate their evolving color palettes and logo design, and worked with the team to deal with placement and color blocking so that the leadership team and the branding team could cooperate while we were developing this new product line. And that really is only possible because of 3D. Another really interesting project which kind of highlighted some of the creative value of moving into 3D was a project that actually we worked on with Daryn, where we had a creative brief to reimagine the iconic Adidas tracksuit. And we did this in a matter of a few days. And what the design team, which was Daryn and Karina Ochoa, they jumped in with both feet and started looking at how to take the Adidas logo and cut it into the fabric, which again would have been something totally impractical to try and do if you were dealing with physical garments. And they went through an endless number of iterations until they settled on a size and a placement, and then immediately saw opportunities to introduce customization and personalization. And it's that kind of creative opportunity that I think is one of the most exciting aspects. And lastly, I'll talk about a project that we did with Ludacris, Chris Bridges, who developed an animated children's television series starring a 3D animated character, and we designed an entire line of apparel for that character, prototyped it in 3D, and then Mattel took the 3D prototypes and turned them into a toy, and then the products were then launched in Target. So it really kind of was a backdoor through the metaverse into the real world, which really kind of speaks to the flexibility and the mutability of 3D and the general utility of being able to work with a digital asset in so many different ways. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. We've got really a great group here. I'm going to start with Tetsuo Tamanaha.
Hello, nice meeting you. So many years ago, when I was in graduate school, my graduate thesis was about survey of historical costumes, particularly in the patterns and construction technique used. So since I'm teaching here now, I like to continue my research. So last year I sent my research proposal to FIT Museum. And at the time, curator, deputy director of the museum, Patricia Mears, was working on new exhibition, Balenciaga and Christian Dior project. So I was asked if I were interested in a collaboration. So of course I said yes. So that originally I was asked to make the create a pattern and a replica of the 3 garments they selected. And one of them was a Balenciaga's taffeta dress from 1960s. So because of the fragile state of the garment, I was only allowed to take measurements and then photos. So I took hundreds of photos and took measurements. And then I achieved that. I tried use a draping technique to achieve the look. So after 3 trials, I felt comfortable, like you can see the picture. And so I finished the draping. And after that, I digitized the draped pieces and then turned into digital patterns. Then after that, I created all the pattern parts and plot the patterns and then finished the muslin samples and displayed in the museum. And then at the same time, I also export a pattern and into 3D, Browzwear 3D. And then so I tried to do a 3D simulation, which was the hardest part. And it took a couple of weeks and many, many simulations after, because this very complex nature of the construction with the inside structure, and also inside the piece comes outside and then twisted and so. So anyway, so finally I felt comfortable with simulation. So that's how I finished. And then yes, so the pattern parts that so this is that finally we decide also to do a little bit of movement, because I think that beauty of a garment can only be appreciated when it's worn and the wearer moves around. So this 3D Browzwear 3D animation feature actually revived the historical garment in a digital environment. So it was great too.
Hi. So I'm actually a fairly new graduate from FIT. I graduated during COVID, and I was blessed to be taught by Professor Tamanaha in pattern making. And I strongly believe that a 3D artist or 3D designer needs to know a wide breadth of skills in order to achieve any success. You need to know Illustrator, Adobe, Blender. All these skill sets really are needed to achieve any kind of digital twin, which is what I've been obsessed with since I learned 3D. Being able to work with Browzwear in the DTech Lab, MLB, Calvin Klein, Daryn, Walmart, and now Swim in Target. I find swimwear particularly challenging because you need all the design sets that you learn in school. You need to know how to shear, you need to know how to smock, you need to know how to drape, you need to know how to use trim properly. You need to know fabric elasticity and all kinds of these things to achieve a perfect bra, which is a very complex piece in design. We have a shirred top here, which is something that you need to hit landmarks in order to create the bust, and it's something that I find challenging because I'm trained in menswear, and to accentuate a woman's body properly, you need to know all the components. So achieving that in underwire and things like that in 3D is actually kind of tough because if it doesn't look right, the sample won't look right, and no one's gonna buy it. So we can move on to the next slide, and this is basically what a swimsuit pattern might look like in 3D. And you have to adjust it, you have to fit it properly. It has to have the right pressure maps, and it needs to fit snug in order to look proper. So yeah, my journey in 3D has been testing, and swim is something that I enjoy because it's challenging. So yeah.
So that's great, and it really brings to the surface some of the exciting opportunities creatively, but also really one of those big challenges, and that is the range of skills that are required to come together to really execute. And not only execute from a pattern and technical perspective, but in terms of the way it's rendered, the way fabrics and materials are represented. It's not just a texture map or a photograph of the material. It's got to have shader networks built on top of it so that it renders right when the light falls off the primary axis. And those sorts of techniques are techniques that designers are beginning to embrace and incorporate into their repertoire of skills. And that brings us to Daryn, who has been exploring knitwear and trims and how important it is to get that right.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Darren, as Michael has just introduced. But so a little bit about me. I started Browzwear, maybe it was 2019. I was a sophomore, and I immediately loved it because as a designer myself, I like to cut with a lot of pieces. So the garments get very expensive. But when it comes to making the pieces, like it takes hours to trace every pattern by hand and then to cut it out and then to do a muslin. And then, of course, your muslin's never right? That's what we make them. So then the great thing about 3D is you can make one, you can make 10, the pattern doesn't change, but it just evolves. And I think that's a big thing about why I embrace 3D so much, because it just gives you so much time to experiment and to test and to, tell yourself it doesn't have to be perfect the first time, but at the end, it will look perfect, right? So I was at another company before, and we were mainly focusing on wovens. And so when I saw the opportunity to do knits, I specialize in knits myself. And in my head, it was always a struggle of, okay, well, we don't have all the fabrics necessary to make it, or like knits are very customized. You have cables, you have different stitches, and that's part of the fun. That's retrieving it, putting it into Photoshop, getting it right, and then making it presentable to everyone so that everyone's looking at what you're looking at, because the whole point of 3D is to unify everything. So what we do at major labels, we do a lot of Christmas sweaters, and this is an example, and I like to focus today on certain things. So we can go back to the previous. So this is a drink pocket sweater where, like you can put a can of beer in that pocket. And our menswear designer craftily put it where the pocket is actually that rocket ship or UFO. It's hidden sneakily. And when it comes to sweaters, there's a lot of things that go into a sweater. Making a sweater look like a sweater in Browzwear also is a challenge, because you have to take fabrics that are sometimes used for cut and sew, and you have to pull it out a little bit. You have to relax it. You have to make it feel natural, as if you would want to be in that sweater. And that's where styling comes into play, because when you make a sweater pattern, traditionally it's more rigid because you knit in a grid system. But when you're talking about Browzwear and 3D, you have to sort of exaggerate a little bit, because you want that shape to look just like a sweater sleeve in real life, and you want the customer to feel, oh, yes, that sweater is the sweater that I want to wear. So sometimes you have to take your liberties as an artist, which is why, being a designer, you have to be creative, and you have to really show what other people what you're envisioning. And when it comes to Christmas, there's a lot of trims that are involved with your sweater. This one, we have pom poms, we have some jingle bells to make it feel festive. And in order to get it to feel like you're right in front of that sweater, you want to touch it. Uh, Back then, we used to use images, but we felt that using images alone for something that was in 3D to represent a pom-pom or a jingle bell, it felt counterintuitive. Why are we using 2D to solve 3D problems? And a solution to that I discovered was using Blender and creating the trims myself. And I know a lot of you, like, 3D might be scary, and I had felt comfortable working in V-Stitcher, but even myself, I was sort of scared to branch out into more traditional 3D, which is actually just creating geometry from scratch. But I just felt like, if we go to the next slide, that if you take the time to experiment and sit and troubleshoot with your geometry and you export it out, and once you bring it into vStitcher, that your sweater comes alive, you know? Like if you look up at the pom-pom, it's like sticking out at you, and it has a little fuzzy texture, and that the jingle bell is shiny and it's also popping out. And I think that's what takes your garment to the next level, because you know, people that you're selling to, if you're sending an image, they're not there with the sweater necessarily, but if they see something that's sticking out, you know, it might gravitate more to them and take your garment to the next level. And this is just like the workflow. There's a lot of artwork that goes into sweater making, because you have fair aisles, and then you have the actual design that's incorporated into with the fair aisle. So you have to pick your battles on what things you want artworks and which ones you want put into fabric, because the more artworks you lay, the harder it is to change around. And you want to always be working in a way that you don't confuse yourself and you don't confuse everyone else. It's always line of communication is very important in 3D, because even if everyone has their own way of working, you share your files, and that's the point. So we always want to be working in a way that everyone is clear. So next slide. And so this is the physical. So you can see that the physical and the 3D look quite similar, and that's always our goal as a 3D artist or designer, is to align physical and virtual.
So, Darren, that's great, and I really, you touched on some really important parts of making that garment believable and the skills that are required to do it, and how important it is to do it. Because as we talk about change management, which is really the hardest part of integrating 3D, convincing the creative directors that this really is real is such an important part of doing that. And this kind of fabrication is challenging and really requires a effective dimensionality in order to be convincing. So I appreciate you providing this as a good example. Now, really, I guess the next question for the panel is, what do you see as a creative horizon? Where do you want to actually push the process of creating garments now that you've kind of mastered some really broad skills? And I'll start with Ted.
Well, my very ambitious goal is that I just get is that we have great museum, and I like to make archive of the historical costume in a digital file, so that a student and faculty member can benefit from that. So that will be my, you know.
That's an amazing goal, and wow, one that would be of such great value to anybody who looks at the museum as the kind of resource that it is. From the point of view of being able to construct couture, construct historical garments that are really carefully fashioned with a lot of detail, and be able to unpack it and really see it for how it works and how to change it, would be a terrific resource.
Yes, so the museum, that exhibition was particularly unique because the curator was really like to focus on not just looking at the garment, you know, like exhibition, the dresses, all these garments, but they want viewers to understand how these garments are built and why the garment doesn't look the way it looks, because it's not just design, but it's execution of the pattern and the construction technique they used. So that, in the sense, that was very unique, and I really enjoyed the project.
Great answer. Now, Calvin, what do you see as a horizon?
For me, it definitely has to be speed to market and reducing sampling to one. I've had success in this in the past, and I try to bring it to every team that I do see, consult, or work with. And you being able to adjust something on the fly in front of a team of designers is very important. And everything at the end of the day, in a production standpoint, is speed to market and cost efficiency. And being able to do that swiftly in 3D with your team is something I think is a horizon we can meet.
That's great. Now, how about creatively? What sort of kind of juices you've got flowing in terms of like your creative ambition? Because you've designed some really nice menswear stuff.
Uh, I can challenge. A lot of times, I'm able to challenge my superiors in how we execute construction, like Ted said, and how we're able to display our marketing techniques with our rendering, being able to push the boundaries because you want more detailed products, and a lot of the times when you're presenting something to someone, it's usually in like a clear space. It's a white background, uh, but you can also add flavor to it and your designs come out with that kind of flavor, if that makes sense.
It's interesting. Pattern making and construction, so vitally important. You know, we think of them as in the past, but they're absolutely even more vital now in 3D in order for you to be facile and effective. Darren?
Well, I would like to, challenge ourselves to make even more intricate sweaters because the whole thing about sweaters is a lot of them tend to be more basic, but that's because we're limited time construction. But if we could just work with the software to get more sweater friendly things and be able to produce even better quality sweaters is always a, active challenge because it's hard even achieving something that looks like a sweater without the fuzziness and that requires a lot of rendering post. That if everything comes together with technology improvements, I'm sure we'll get there.
So thank you all.